I'm Ryan from Nebraska Medicine. So thank you guys for having me. Kind of excited about the opportunity. I was telling the group earlier, this is my first time actually on this campus. I drive by it twice a day, every single day, so it's kind of nice to step foot inside. Objectives for today, we're going to talk about strategic versus operational leadership. I'm kind of a data guy. I've worked at Nebraska Medicine for 10 years, and everybody knows I'm a data guy, so I'm going to talk about data in like every presentation I give. So we'll spend a little time doing that as well. And then healthy work environments. We've all probably seen good ones, and we've seen bad ones, and there's a ton of research on how to do this, so I'll share what I've read and a little bit of what I've observed. So my background, I'm an engineer by training. So I'm not a nurse. Thank you for having me. I have worked with them an awful lot. So our chief nursing officer, Sue Nuss, she's really close to giving me like an honorary nursing at this point. She lets me hang around and she humors me a little bit. So I'm 10 years in now to being with Nebraska Medicine. I started in traditional engineering stuff. So I have a couple of nurses in the family, I have some doctors in the family, and I'm married to a physician assistant. And their jobs were way more fun than my job was. So I tried to figure out how engineers could get into healthcare. I eventually figured it out and started doing process improvement stuff. That's like the data nerd thing. So I did that a little bit at Nebraska Medicine. I spent time in critical care, emergency, working in just acute care services, doing a lot of staffing stuff. And most recently, I'm the director for neurosciences and orthopedics for Nebraska Medicine. So I do a lot of work with the clinics and therapy and all of our providers. And I like top 10 lists. I realized this as I was making this presentation, and like every slide is already ranked. And I'm like, holy cow, I really like top 10 lists. So I'm embracing it. And my top 10 baseball movies of all time. The best part about presenting, and this part is not interactive, so like you just have to assume these are right. Best baseball movies of all time. And since I'm a data nerd, I don't know if anybody's read Moneyball, seen the movie Moneyball. It's fantastic. I would recommend reading it by Michael Lewis. And he talks a lot about innovation and how to use data to beat your competition. And it's a different take on it. So if you haven't read it, and if you like baseball at all, it's a pretty nice, easy read. Or you can save the time and it's an hour and a half movie. So I think about me, strengths are important. Anybody done the StrengthsFinders assessment? Okay. So StrengthsFinders people have a language unto themselves. So I'm going to show you what my strengths are. And you know, people who have done it or people who know anything about it, it's about embracing your strengths and developing those strengths to make you the unique leader that you can be. So I'm there. I'm heavily on the nerd side with the analytical and the learner and the strategic. And I totally expect by the end of this presentation I will not have influenced anybody because the green category of influencing I'm a little light. But if you haven't, this is another one. Like it's worth the read and it's worth doing it as you continue to develop yourself as a leader. So it's tough to do it all. And my example here, this woo for you StrengthsFinder people, you're like super outgoing and you work the room. And my aunt and my sister know that is not me. So I've embraced that and I'll hang out in the corner and play with my spreadsheet. I know in kind of reading your guys' curriculum the last couple of sessions, and you're talking about leadership, and it's the art of leadership and the science of leadership. And clearly the answer is that it's both. And so I'll try to focus more on the science, but I can't ignore the art of leadership also. You know, the art is what makes people unique. It's what makes charismatic leaders. And I think, like, that's tough to teach. That's like the embracing who you are as a leader part of it. And the science, the good news is, like, it can be taught. And so the example of their family member who's not here is my brother. That's the artist. He is really good at all of this stuff. He went to school for it. I'm terrible. I'm stick figures, but I always had science on them. And then he went and got his doctorate, and now he does what I do better than me. Super frustrating, but it can be taught. I've been taught, and people teach it regularly, so that's the good news. Strategic versus operational management. I think of it, we talk about leadership muscles a lot at Nebraska Medicine because we got to develop them, we got to train them, they got to be specific to the muscles that you're trying to work. So strategy and operational management is absolutely indicative of that. Different muscles, different tools, but it's kind of a process both ways. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the tools that strategists use, and Six Sigma people like to talk about Six Sigma a lot, so I'm going to try not to spend too much time on it, but we will talk a little bit about Six Sigma as an example of one operational leadership tool. Clearly there's a distinction. Clearly there's different skills, and I bucket these a couple of different ways. So strategic leadership is aligning your team within organizational missions, strategies that may have already been set, and working within those parameters to achieve the organization's goals. Operational leadership is really that driving the outcomes piece. You know where you're going. You got to figure out how to get there as efficiently as possible. A couple of other ways that I would bucket this. Setting plan, making the high-level selections of where you're going and what you're doing, and then transitioning to execution. So we talk about, like, my presentation is super healthcare focused because that's what I do, and I know that's what you guys do too. But others in the room who may spend time outside of healthcare, like leadership is translational, right? It works regardless of the setting. So the things that they're talking about in the auto industry related to leadership are the exact same things that we're talking about here. And the Six Sigma toolkits are translatable from one area to the next. So before we dig into it too, and back to the strengths finders, you kind of got to understand like where your niche is too. So like I'm going to try to convince you that these things are different, that they're both really important, and maybe we're not all great at both, but you got like a room full of peers and an entire hospital's worth of them too. So collaborating with and partnering with folks that have the skills that complement yours is incredibly important. So I'll talk about relationships at least a dozen times in this presentation, to the point where you're going to like get tired of hearing me say it. But relationships are important because they build that environment that you want with your teams, and they also help you identify who can complement you and your teams. Last like definition slide, I think strategic leadership is kind of an abstract topic. That's why I kind of got it up here a couple of different times in a couple of different ways. But it's within the organization's mission, vision, and strategy. How do you make those decisions? When I think strategy, immediately jump to like the off-site retreat where you spend like 8 hours like hashing it out. You do your SWOT, and that's not what strategic leadership is. It's an ongoing use of that muscle to guide your teams. You don't need to be the CEO to practice strategic leadership. I think some of the most strategic folks that you work with are like that bedside nurse that just knows exactly what is ahead of him or her for the next day or week and gets all their resources in advance and is cranking it out. So like they know how to do this. But it comes down to the mission. So before I get to my next slide, just show of hands if you know your organization's mission. It's not bad. It's like half. I get the same response over at Nebraska Medicine. So even though we have it up on the website and all of that, it's not always really well known. Our mission is to lead the world in transforming lives for all individuals and communities through premier educational programs, innovative research, and extraordinary patient care. So that's important for me, and it's important for us, for an academic medical center. So the decisions that we make, if I make decisions that are solely based on clinical operations, which I would have a tendency to do based on my job and my role, I'm not serving the mission, and I'm not leading strategically. So we have this educational mission, we have this research mission. So I think it's important for folks at all levels of the organization to understand why missions exist. We are serving this community. We have goals set forth for us by our board, and everything that we do within the hospital should be aligned with one of those things. And our strategies are set and reasonably transparent, fairly vague, but everything that we're trying to accomplish at the moment is the aim of eliminating patient harm, creating a culture of trust and well-being, which is timely. I got to prepare this conversation when I get to culture of trust and well-being, since I'm supposed to be doing that anyway. Partnering to meet the needs of those we serve, providing an engaging experience, and driving best practices. It's important to know your strategies, not only to tell you what you should be doing, but I think more importantly to tell you what you should not be doing. Because you guys probably get asked a dozen times a week, can I do this? Should we do this? And hey, this is a really good idea. And they are. We work with just a tremendous amount of smart people, and they all have really good ideas, and we don't have the resources to do them all, and we shouldn't. So part of leading strategically is knowing when to say no. And saying no, I think, is a skill and a muscle all of its own. You can't say no all the time, but knowing when it's okay to say no and why is something that we as leaders, it's kind of imperative that we know how to do that well. So we're going to talk a little bit about what I think are some of the key skills within strategic leadership. This one is stolen from the Harvard Business Review, but totally applicable, and I've learned key elements on all of these. So what I'll kind of share, and I won't read the slides for you guys, but some of the leadership lessons that have been handed off to me that I think are super applicable. So in anticipate, if you're gathering feedback and knowing what your competition is doing and knowing what is needed from our stakeholders and our patients, it's all about routine. So the best advice I can give is read a lot and read stuff that is of different opinions than yours. So I can't read all the things of my political leanings. I have to read the other political leaning as well, to really understand how people are, what they're wanting, what they're seeing, and it will help us as leaders understand what they need to do. Challenge. This, I think, we're taught this in engineering school, that you're supposed to critique like the living daylights out of anything like ad nauseum until you're sure that this is going to work. And that's true in leadership as well. In decisions that we're making or ideas that we're proposing, seeking out dissenting opinions is important, and have people try to poke holes in what you're thinking about doing. Because if you can make it through a couple of people that like you and a couple of people that maybe don't, maybe you got something going there and you got a good solution, or at least it's better thought out. And in learning, feedback loops. So we'll talk about this again in the PI section. Once you propose something, it's rounding on your teams, and it's getting feedback, and it's understanding, is this going to work? So communication is incredibly critical, just to understand what's actually happening. We all know within leadership, making the decisions is kind of a big part of it. The examples that are up there are not super healthcare related, balancing the investment of long-term growth for short-term pressure. We don't generally have a bunch of shareholders that are demanding a return, but nonetheless, we have pressure to make decisions quickly, make decisions that maybe are in the best interest of folks. So the feedback that I've been giving as the data nerd is you got to make decisions pretty regularly. There is this balance between analysis by paralysis, which is where I lean. And like the shooting from the hip, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I know this is going to work. And so finding that balance that you're moving quickly enough that you're leading your team and not stalling them out, then you're also making data-driven decisions. Align. Know your people. So back to the rounding, back to when we're hiring, back to when you've had somebody there for 30 years who's understanding what makes them tick. Without knowing your people, without knowing your peers, without knowing the people at the table that are helping you make the decisions, it's very difficult to lead strategically. And the last one here being learn. I got off track, didn't I, gang? Sorry, Thanksgiving. I'll hear all about it. So tools for strategic leadership. This is not novel. You guys may do this in your organizations, but the development of a balanced scorecard. Really, so let's first talk about what a balanced scorecard is. It's a mix of financial and non-financial measures that are kind of guiding you to say, here's what we should be focused on at the moment. If we achieve X, Y, and Z, we will achieve our organizational mission and our strategy. So we've embraced this organizationally in Nebraska Medicine. I've embraced this individually with my own teams. And I found it to be about the most powerful thing that I've done for the leaders in my group. And why that is back to we got to make 100 decisions every day, and what do we work on? If you can set a group of measures and a group of focal areas for your leaders on this is the most important thing for us for this year, for this quarter, it helps empower them to say yes and empower them to say no. So our balanced scorecards, organizationally, we're pretty good and transparent about saying what our domain focal areas are. So I guess different than our mission and our strategies. We try to make improvements in domains of culture, domains of growth, reputation, and value. And at the middle of everything we're doing is patient safety. So you'll see all of our organizational goals on our balanced scorecard are tied to one of these. And I'll show you my individual scorecard in a moment here as well that's tied to all of these. So this is kind of, you'll hear people talk about like that golden thread that weaves the mission down to individual level performance. That's how we try to approach this, by scorecards or dashboards that link what all of us as leaders are doing to what the organization is supposed to achieve. Our organizational scorecard, part of the key of this is if you're thinking about implementing this through teams, is knowing how much to focus on. At our organizational level, it's 20 things. And it sounds overwhelming, and sometimes it kind of is. But in a organization with revenues over $1 billion, there's a lot going on. And so to get it down to 20 is like quite the task. That is the multiple day retreat for people to fight over which are the top 20 and get it down there. We look at it every single month. It's posted on our intranet site so all of our employees can see what's on there and how are we performing. And we talk about it pretty darn regularly. I think in healthcare that's really important, especially like the balance of non-financial measures. We're all, at least our two systems are not-for-profit, they're mission-based. We have to make decisions based on finance at that time, but we kind of serve a greater purpose. So having that on display and having that guide decision-making, again, is important. So part of this transition, we had some strategic leadership set for us. We got this balanced scorecard that's a pretty cool tool that lets us know what are the diverse things that we're supposed to be working on in order to achieve our goals. And so now it's time to like start driving the outcomes. How do you actually get there? And I think different muscle also really, really hard. Because now like, we know where we got to go. We work with physicians, nurses, we work with administrators and everything in between, getting everybody together to understand there's where we're going and how we're going to pull this thing off in an incredibly complex system that is healthcare. So how do you approach a problem? This is my Six Sigma shit here. We use a lot of acronyms in PI. I think partially because healthcare uses a lot of acronyms and we never know what you guys are talking about. And we wanted some of our own. But the big secret here is, like, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to talk about DMAIC. It's, there's PDSA and all these things are kind of and so this first one that I think we're all familiar with in this room, you guys all went through nursing school, which is science. What is the scientific method? It's just a way to approach a problem, to figure out if it's worth working on and develop a solution. I didn't make this. I'm told this is the nursing project. So it's similar where we got to assess and diagnose and plan and implement and evaluate. Differential diagnoses, different words, same systematic approach to solving a problem and driving improvements. And then the ones that I think get a lot of buzz throughout industries is the Six Sigma stuff and PDSA, because it's not healthcare people who invented it, and we try to make it sound important. Sometimes it's the exact same thing. It's a systematic approach to identifying and solving a problem. So I'm going to talk amongst all of those just about DMAIC for a little bit because it's the one that I know the best, but it's hopefully convinced you that it doesn't matter. DMAIC stands for Define, Measure, Analyze, Improve, Control. I should probably ask, do you guys have like an endorsed problem-solving methodology within Methodist that you guys subscribe to? And what is that?
PDSA, but we have a main team that follow the other models.
Okay. So again, different acronyms, exact same stuff. Pretty powerful, I think, for us at Nebraska Medicine with some of our newer employees and newer leaders, just to sit down for a bit and think about how to approach a problem. So before you get started, what is the actual problem that you're trying to solve? I think half of the work that starts in PI for us starts because I want to implement the solution, because I want to implement the solution. And if it's a solution that doesn't solve a problem that we actually have, you can kill yourself sometimes. Time is critical, as you guys know. So understanding what the problem is and who is impacted by having that problem. Measurement, this is the data piece where we kind of got to prove a lot of the stuff out. How are we performing compared to how we should be performing? So I think in healthcare, we've gotten much better. Benchmarking, which is the step of the process that we benchmark, where we see where I see how's Methodist doing this, or I see how's Iowa performing in this, and just across the country. Analyzing is understanding what actually drives the errors that you're experiencing. What is the root cause of this problem? So within healthcare, we do a lot of RCAs too. What is the actual event that led to the negative outcome? Same thing in the PI process. Your improvement should be specific to eliminating that event that led to that outcome, and then controlling it, monitoring it going forward. In full transparency here, we do define, measure, analyze, improve pretty darn well at Nebraska Medicine, and controlling it. Like after we've achieved that success, to make sure we're achieving it 2 years later, not so much. It's really hard.
Yeah, right there with you. Right?
Yeah. I was hoping you guys could teach me. But like, how do you maintain interest and momentum and ownership well after that core team? It's like people are least interested in this one because there's it's kind of a no-brainer. You just got to stay on top of it. But it's where we've fallen down in the past. So my pseudo top 10. But top 8 steps for driving outcomes. Understanding what is most important in your department, within your system, and knowing your current performance. Identifying a team of subject matter experts to know the process. We talk about subject matter experts. It means a lot. It's the people who actually know how this thing works. It's definitely not me if I don't live it every single day. They know how it goes wrong. They know how it goes right, and they know how to fix it. So like that's a critical step, and I think like the vetting of who should participate in solving these things is perhaps the most important thing to know. And I bolded build and maintain strong relationships down there because without that, this all falls on its face a little bit. And I think nurses, one of the reasons I love working with nurses are particularly adept because nurses understand the value of building relationships with their patients in order to get them to comply, building relationships with providers in order to get the time and energy that their patients need, and building relationships with each other because like the team of nursing is about as strong as you're going to see because you guys know this because you all have each other's backs. So we have a lot of nurses in PI that we have taught these tools to, and then they in turn teach us actually how to pull this off within the system. So the super short way of saying this that we've embraced is this little formula of quality times acceptance equals effectiveness. And so we'll just refer to it as the A. We always use the air quotes when we talk about it. The A, because it's time spent in advance knowing what you're up against, knowing what it's going to take to get a team of people bought in. And planning in advance that there's going to be a change and how you bring this team or this system of people along with you for the ride. So back to the art and science thing, the quality is the science, it's systematic, and we're going to use data, and I still think the acceptance, while there's some steps you can take, this is the art piece, and this is embracing who you are as a leader and getting people to trust you and come along with it. Last impacts of driving outcomes, just credibility. People are naturally resistant to change. You guys have probably experienced this. I'm resistant myself, unless it's my idea, which I'm up for that. So they'll convince you that the status quo is just fine, or we can put our heads in the sand and whatever we're trying to solve is going to pass, and it's going to be fine. But good data and subject matter expertise is what drives credibility. It's not like the one person sitting in front of the room saying, we got to do this, because you can kind of shove that off. Positive intent, whatever we're trying to do it, whether it's our idea or an idea that's being passed down to us, because as leaders, we still got to beat the drum for the organization and the idea of how ours. So understanding the why we're trying to pull this off, the how it aligns with strategy, and ultimately it ought to improve patient outcomes or make the job easier. So these are the things we talk about a lot before we get a bunch of people in the room. Like, is this going to make our patient safer? Is this going to make our jobs easier? Or is it going to make something a little bit more efficient? It's got to be one of the three. And if it's not, we got to really question why we're working on it. Relationships. This is one of those, I hate to call it like a soft skill, even though it's the only way I know how to differentiate it from the science stuff. Will absolutely make or break our team performance. So the relationships the leaders have and the relationships that the team members have to be built in advance during the work and kind of forever and ever. So I'm going to try to walk through a practical example. I think performance improvement stuff is difficult to do, in an hour session. So I was thinking about how to present this, and I know a guy who's got to do some stuff in neuro and ortho, so we can kind of walk through what I'm tackling at the moment and how I've tried to apply some of these processes and see if it makes sense. So I said step one was understanding what is most important for your department. So I'm lucky that I've been told what's most important for my department. We're actually evaluated and compensated based off of how we do with these things that are most important for my department. So it is balanced. I've got culture, growth, reputation, and value listed on here. And these are the 5 measures that me and my team need to stay acutely focused on over the course of this year. And so one of the first things that we're trying to tackle is this idea of new specialty patients seen within 10 days. So I know I got to get to 43% of my patients with an appointment within 10 days of getting a call. We picked that one to start with, at the beginning of the year, because I have a long ways to go. I'll transparently show you that data, and I got a team of people who's willing to put in the effort, so that helps too. Work with the willing is something that we talk about a lot, because look at you, they're faster and better than the non-willing folks. So knowing current performance. So when it comes to data, you kind of got to see it yourself. You got to know where it comes from and is it valid. So our data comes from our wonderful Epic system, where when the patient calls, we log it, and when the appointment gets completed, we can see that too. And so for this last year, 33.6% of our patients with neuroscience got an appointment within 10 days. Industry benchmarks for an academic medical center is 43. So while the numbers look small, it's 30% improvement in 1 year. I'm a little freaked out. But we're approaching this systematically. So we said identify a team of experts who can help you understand what's going wrong and what's going right. And so the selection here matters. I've got nurses, I've got the team of folks that answers the phone, and I got providers, of course. And we're fortunate enough to have an access team who can help us with the information, help us with best practices, and have seen this work in a number of different areas. So asked them if they would help. They all volunteered and said yes, which I'm grateful for, and we've been meeting regularly for some time now. So I said understanding what factors impact the outcome is the next really critical step. Folks who took a little bit of calculus are seeing my y is a function of x stuff and maybe having shivers from back when we took the math classes. This is not as complex, but knowing that any outcome is a function of several different factors is just a key step for us when we're doing performance improvement. There's 20 different factors that could impact our ability to get those appointments scheduled. Which ones are the most important? So we got some feedback from experts, but we looked at a bunch of data, and we read a lot. And the top three ultimately that rose to the list for us were the actual process of scheduling, the systems we use, how we do it, and the knowledge that our folks have. The utilization of that schedule, it's going to get a little detailed, but how many appointment slots that we have, what are we doing, provider leaves to go to a conference or, is on vacation, and how do we shuffle our schedules around, and then ultimately, what is the capacity of our individual providers. So we chose scheduling effectiveness as a place to start. This is one of the pieces of feedback that we found during this, is when people were calling on my clients, we were unable to answer that call 19% of the time. You can't share this outside of this room. I'm embarrassed to share this with you. So we kind of like, where do we start? And answering the phone seems like pretty basic, and you can't schedule an appointment if I don't actually talk to the patient. So why don't we fix that first? We've got good data to tell us that we need to fix this. And believe me when I say that people wanted to work on other stuff instead of just working on answering the phones, because that's not terribly sexy, but we followed the data and we said, let's do that. So the next step being working with subject matter experts to develop solutions. We did a lot of stuff, and we're in the process of doing a lot of stuff. And I've got it all in one slide here, which doesn't do the work justice, because there was a lot of meetings and a lot of reviewing of other people's best practices. But ultimately, we said we got to update our telephony system, because amongst my clinics there were different platforms, and I had different abilities to monitor phone. I had one clinic where I didn't even know how many phone calls were coming in a given month. I'm like, that's hard. So we had to update that. That was step one. Things like updating how calls route. My scheduler said this needs to happen. I need to be able to answer as many phones as Bob sitting next to me and Susan to my right. And so we listened and we did that. And we found ways to get good data to our people that are answering the phone so that they can see how we're doing and they can see how the work that they do ties back to our organizational goals. And they are actually asking me for this now when I come walking through the clinics, like how we do last week, Ryan. And I'm glad that I can say that I can tell them and things are getting better. So next step, creating an implementation plan. I stole that from the internet. Ours is still a work in progress amongst all of my clinics, but I suspect if I was back here in a couple of months, I'd have a really cool Gantt chart to show you guys about how we plan to roll this out systematically between all of my clinics. And again, ask me in 3 months how we monitored and tweaked, because I confess we're not very good at monitoring and tweaking our processes moving forward, but this one's pretty important. So we're committed to not falling off the wagon. And building and maintaining strong relationships, again, isn't a process step, but this whole thing hinges on it. So I'm lucky that the relationships between my team and the providers are fantastic. They all trust each other and want to help each other. So Neuroscience is a great place for us to start. Top 10 doc reads. Number 1 is clearly the people. And I'm not biased. Except for I am biased, because everyone else is trying for after that. So these are 2 of the 3 kids. This is my one, a very old dog, and he's getting older by the day, but he's a great parent and a better fellow. Okay, so now we get into the work environment. You guys also saw on my scorecard that I had a turnover goal as well. Turnover is all about work environment. I know there's gobs of leadership data that says people don't leave jobs, they leave leadership, they leave environment. Sometimes they go to Methodist if you guys are paying a little bit more. But neither here nor there. We'll talk about that another time. So this is something that I have to focus on as well as we try to retain our people. So this guy wrote an article for Forbes with his top 7 factors, and that aligned with my little theme for the day, so I stole that as well. And he kind of said, if you can do these 7 things, you'll have a positive environment. And then I added 1 more, because there's a leader at Nebraska Medicine, Dr. Michael Ash, who says this all the time: clarity, alignment, focus. And so we'll talk a little bit today about that. I won't run through all 8, but I did pick my 4 favorites that we can dive into just a little bit. So building trust. Seems simple, but you guys all know that leader that you've worked with in the past, that there's something about that gal that I just don't trust. It takes a career to build, and it takes a moment to lose. So being intentional about what you say, being intentional about what you do, and not over-promising and under-delivering. So those are Ryan's guides to building trust. I think a lot of us just kind of know what we expect of others. We don't expect the exact same thing in ourselves. And owning up to mistakes. There's like very little shame at Nebraska Medicine. Anyway, that if you make a mistake, that's okay, so long as we're willing to fix it. And our teams appreciate that about us, and they appreciate that that's how we look at them as well. And of course, facts and data. People don't have to trust me, but it's hard to argue data, so I rely on it a lot. Communication, I think I don't need to tell a room of nurses about this either. On the floor in a clinic, most everything that goes wrong is on account of poor communication or no communication. And I think leadership is the same. I learned a lesson on this even a couple of weeks ago when I had a very irate staff member that said, Ryan, why haven't you told me about this thing that we talked about 4 months ago? And my thought was, because nothing's changed. And they were like, yeah, but I need to know that. So communicating even when there's nothing to communicate is really, really important. Being honest and authentic, and I've got this note in here of making sure it's productive. I'll soapbox it for a second. Like, I don't love the open door policy, just for the sake of having an open door policy, because when you open your door, you may get a bunch of people that come in there and just whine, to put it loosely, and that's not productive. So, like, being available to your team is really important. Direct feedback to them is really important. Like the shoulder to cry on, ain't nobody got time for that. So we have to be intentful for how we're communicating. Having fun is really important. I remind my teams about this and all of my new hires. So like the nurse right out of school with like the eyes wide, and they just put them through like a week's worth of new employee orientation, and I'm kind of freaking out. And then they're listening to Ryan say like it's okay to have fun, and they don't know what that means. So they IDs running every which way, and healthcare is like really dangerous. And there's a ton of responsibility on all of our employees that work at the hospital or at the clinics. But we spend 12, 13, 14 hours all working with each other. A lot of us spend as much time at work as we do awake with our families, and if it's not fun, like, you're gonna leave. So we talk about that a lot. If you're going to build this environment, there's got to be something about it that makes it fun, that makes it so you can build friendships with the people that you work with, and you can kind of be yourself. Luckily for me, I don't think it's the leader's job to like make the fun. We as leaders have to enable a fun environment to happen. And I work with a lot of people that are way, way more fun than I am, so they just tell me what to do. And all I gotta do is play along and pull out a meme or something every once in a while, and that's I've hit the bar that they've set for me. So my note here is not only is it okay, but it's kind of necessary. And those people that refuse fun, we know all those folks, and they're a drag on the environment too. I haven't figured out exactly what to do with those folks. Conga lines didn't work, but we'll get there. And so this clarity, alignment, and focus, and so another moment of transparency when Dr. Ash said this like the first time, I like ignored it. And then he said it the second time, and it was starting to make me mad because I didn't like it. It feels like really buzzwordy. And then other people started saying it, so then I started listening because I'm resistant to change as well. And now I like it enough that I put it in my presentations, and I'm the guy that my team is rolling their eyes at because I'm talking about clarity, alignment, and focus again. And why I like it so much is it forces us as leaders to set an expectation with our team. It allows them to have the accountability. They know what our organization is trying to do and what our team is trying to do to align with it. That's the clarity in alignment. And they know what their role is. Like, here's what I expect to do. I'm going to provide you some time to figure this out, to meet these expectations, and go. You can kind of block out the things that aren't aligned with this. And so it's been helpful for us to kind of say no and get our teams to understand what it is we're trying to accomplish. So I'm a football fan. And these guys in the maize and blue, in this particular example, they don't know their roles. There are a bunch of buffoons out there doing God knows what. I just assumed this play didn't work because I actually tried to Google if this play worked. I couldn't find it, so it shouldn't have. This slide was much cooler prior to Saturday. It was the example of clarity, alignment, and focus. But everybody knowing their roles, knowing what we're trying to accomplish, we as leaders or coaches are responsible for establishing that. And so clarity, alignment, and focus is my mantra that keeps me in check on whether or not I've done this. Okay, revisiting objectives. We discussed the difference between strategic and operations management, and when to apply some of those skills and some of those muscles. Talked about data being able to not only inform the decisions that we make and help us make better decisions, but also build trust. And that healthy work environments is 100% all about the relationships we build with our teams in a two-way communication we set with them. So I will leave you with the 10 best shows of all time. And there they are. I won't argue the first three. I'll entertain some feedback on 4 through 10. So thank you guys for listening. And if there's any comments, feedback, questions, I'd be happy to entertain.
Is the phone the only way to make appointments?
So that depends. If you're internal, external, or what type of appointment you're trying to make.
Sometimes one doctor will refer you to another.
Yeah, so our internal referrals, we're able to do that electronically now. That's this like multi-million-dollar system that we have. We're trying to actually use it as it was intended. And we're also enabling within our primary care clinics. So for a new appointment with a primary care doctor, once you're established and you just want to return visit, some of our clinics do online scheduling. So we see that as the vision moving forward. Once you get into the specialties, it's a little trickier, but like I've got a neurosurgeon who said, Ryan, let's do it, turn it on. Really, Dr. Sudelli, you want anybody to be able to schedule an appointment with you? And he's like, yeah, bring it, we'll figure it out. So we're heading that way. You can use your MyChart portal or go to the internet, which will help my phone problem. Yes, answer. I probably not.
Do you have any tips for the provider buy-in with the data, getting them to believe the data is right, whether it's patient experience or turnaround time from the lab? It really doesn't matter. Just because you work with them so close, have you found any successful strategies?
Yeah, so I think involving them from the beginning. Like there's 100 ways to pull any report. So you have to, if you as a leader aren't 100% comfortable with the data, bring somebody who is, and just transparently talk to the providers. Say, here's what I know that this represents. What questions do you have? And we can go repull it another way if this wasn't right. So like an openness to acknowledging that this may not be what we think it is. So my first question is like, does this resonate? Does this make sense? And if not, poke holes in it, let's ask questions. There comes a time when like the data just is what it is, like our phone stuff. The metric we use for that, I mean, I get pushback on this a lot. Ryan, we don't need to schedule 100% of our patients within 10 days. They don't all want that. Agreed. And I don't want 100% of them in 10 days either. I want 42%. And that's benchmarked. We use Vizient, which is a collaboration with academic medical centers and community hospitals, that we can see how everybody else is doing, and they told us how to run this data. So it's pretty legit. We've looked at it a lot, and I would welcome any of my providers to get like into the nuts and bolts behind the data so that they can understand it. Those conversations of like, that isn't any good, not productive. So.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.